thinking. They
Gotcha.
don't, but then in the class, I have a lot of very enthusiastic people. They love it. They come back and they say this is the highlight of their week. I spend hours. I go in there and teach for like 4 hours at a time, and some of the guys express how much they look forward to it and everything else. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm there, and I can gauge that a little bit better with some of these guys. And I can say there is evident signs of faith there. But I know firsthand the Lord's power to save people that are in prison, since that's how I was converted 30 years ago.
Sure.
So, and I have a good friend who has been doing great work as well. Many people know him online. He was also in prison. I don't know if you guys know David Wood, but he's a product of the Lord saving somebody in prison. So, anyways,
is he bald?
No.
No, I know a David Wood who was in prison and is doing ministry. So I was just wondering.
Oh.
But anyway, sorry about that, brother.
Are you bald, Anthony, as well?
No. Okay. No, my hair's all smushed down. I cut it short, and it's all smushed down because of my beanie.
I made a comment earlier in the chat about great teachers wearing knit caps.
So, yeah, I've always just loved beanies. I hate when it gets, I don't necessarily like when it's freezing, but when it gets hot, I'm always thinking, man, I miss my beanie. So I wanted to get cold enough again for me to wear it.
I appreciate, brother. Thank you so much.
Sister Candy, you have any questions for Brother Anthony?
No questions. I'm enjoying hearing what he's saying, because it confirms a lot of what I can't explain about my thoughts and the reason I am the way I am. So yeah, I'm loving it. Appreciate you, Anthony. So glad you got him here, Jonathan. Come back again, though, please.
That's all, Pat. We hope he does come back in the future. I'm gonna press for it. So he's in trouble now. Brother Pat, go ahead.
Well, Anthony, I got to ask you this question while we have you here. Did God create evil?
Well, so the problem with this is, what do we mean by evil? So, for one, sometimes Scripture uses evil to refer to the judgments that come up. We could talk about like natural evils, what we might call natural evils. Like if I get a flat tire, that's an evil in the way the Bible uses the term evil. And clearly God claims responsibility for things like that. I didn't accidentally get a flat. It's not like God looked and thought, oh goodness, oops. I mean, God's not up in heaven thinking that, just happened and he didn't know it was going to happen or anything like that. And there's a reason for it, right? Scripture speaks of God bringing floods, bringing destruction, bringing all sorts of things. It's all over the Bible where God is pouring out judgments. So in that sense, God is back of those things that we would call evils. If we're talking about things like this, like judgments, earthquakes, fire, famine, I mean, who else is running the show, right? But if you're talking about moral evil, now God doesn't do evil. He's not immoral. He doesn't do anything contrary to himself. He's the standard of goodness. He couldn't possibly, anything he does is necessarily good because he's the standard of goodness. So if we're talking about moral evil, we're talking about things that are perpetrated by human beings. When they do something that's contrary to what God has said is right and so forth. And so the question has to be, can these people act independently of God? And the answer is no. They don't exist to do it apart from God choosing to make them. They don't have the ability to maintain their own existence in the act. They don't have the power to do the act unless God is upholding them and so forth. That doesn't mean God approves of their evil, but remember all that I said before, that God is the one who's going to hold people accountable for the wicked intentions of their actions, but he's also going to use those actions to accomplish holy ends. So that's how I'd answer that.
Sister Candy, go ahead.
Okay, so you just brought me a question, and that is, so if someone says they don't believe in God, but they're good to people and they do good things and they give this and they give that and they do all these things, but they just don't believe in God because of what he does do. Like, I really don't know what my question was now that I got it all back out.
I think
Go ahead.
I think I have an idea of kind of what you're after. So, I mean, there are a lot of people who think that they're good, they do good, that sort of thing. Number one, they're ignoring the Bible's statements that the heart of man is evil. They may be more restrained than others, but they're resisting the teaching of Scripture and are in danger of God giving them over to further depravity because they're not acknowledging God as the source of whatever they're doing. But here's one way of thinking about this, one of my favorite illustrations. Imagine there's a bunch of people on a ship and all of them work together. It's like a well-oiled machine. Everybody's being good to one another. They're aiding one another. Everybody's doing his job to make everything work. You know, somebody's swabbing the deck. Somebody's making the stew or whatever. Somebody's raising the mast and so forth. Now, all that sounds good. They're evenly dividing whatever money comes into their possession. All that sounds good. But imagine now that if you stood further off from this ship and you saw that up on a pole, it's flying a skull and crossbones. You realize that it's a pirate ship. And this ship is in rebellion against the government. And they're raiding. The reason that they've got money is because they're raiding ships. And what they're dividing among themselves is what they've stolen. And every act that they're doing that otherwise looked good in aiding one another and supporting one another is only helping to further perpetuate their rebellion against the government and their piracy and everything else. If you only look within the ship, it might have the appearance of a bunch of people that are good. But once you have a broader perspective, you realize, no, these are just a bunch of rebels who are only aiding and abetting each other in their activity, right? So there are a lot of people that do things that if we're not looking, Calvin used to say, if people think that their eyesight is really great as long as they're looking down or around them. But as soon as they look up at the sun, their eyesight proves itself worthless, right? Try looking at the sun for longer than a couple seconds. That's not going to go well. Well, as long as we're measuring each other by each other, we can make ourselves look good or others look good. But measured by God, who is the true standard of goodness, nobody looks good at all. And so you think about it, if for an act to be truly good in the eyes of God, three things have to be true. Number one, it has to be done in faith. It has to proceed from faith, from a regenerate heart. Number two, it has to conform to God's standard. It has to be because this is what God says is good, not just because you like it or whatever. And third, it has to be done for God's glory. And when you take those things into account, unbelievers are not doing that. When some person gives away, that's an unbeliever, $1 million to charity, they're not doing it because they have a faith in God. They're trying to glorify him in doing this because this is what he says. They're doing it for other ends. They're
doing it for self-gain or self-status appearance, or whatever.
Yeah.
For selfish reasons, so to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably to get a break on their taxes.
Something not of God, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But no. And then when you started talking about it, and then when you start talking about God turning them over, it makes me wonder too that when they think they're like that and say they are doing what they think is good, like you said at the bird's eye view, no, not even the bird's eye view, but I know, you know what I'm saying. But at the same time, could that be a reprobate that they've been turned over to believe that they are doing good until the day Jesus says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." You
Yeah,
know?
it could be. It could be.
I mean, I thought about that too. And then when you was describing earlier about how basically God uses the natural way of man to control and discipline all of nature, all of mankind. It's not God doing the bad things to someone. The bad is doing it. And then it made me think about a math. When you take the positive and the negative, the greater the positive with a negative, you get positive, right? And the greater the negative, like with the pirate ship, the greater the negative is over the positive, you get the negative. If that makes sense, the bad versus the good. Using it against itself. So God doesn't do it, and everything He does, it does come out to the good of those who love Him and are called by Him for His plans and purpose. There's no way around it. He doesn't plan for this person or this war to break out. But like when we was talking about the 20,000 in the war, okay, out of 20,000 that died, my curiosity would be, out of 20,000 that died, how many actually lives?
Yep. Brother Anthony, a brother in the chat chain there, Anthony D. Nicola. I hope I'm saying your name right, Anthony. Also another Anthony. He's asking, so are you going to come back to TikTok more often?
It's funny. So I know him. He lives in. I think he's still here.
He's still here, yeah. Or
no. I mean, still in my area. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was going to school here at the seminary I went to. So so Anthony, I was invited on here. I have a friend named Pat who I've known for a long, long time, and he introduced me to the Bible Provocateur. And so, I mean, it's possible I'll come on TikTok. I don't know. I was told by somebody I can, because for those that don't know, I mostly do stuff on YouTube. I'm very, in fact, it was already proven today. I'm not very technologically skilled. And so the reason I do YouTube and haven't done TikTok is because, at least for one reason, is I didn't really know how to do a live on TikTok and wasn't interested in putting forth the effort to figure that out. I was content to go on to YouTube where I do all my main stuff. But maybe now that I know how to do this, I might do it more.
Well, I Brother Anthony, I think that Anthony Di Nicola asked you that is a good question, and I will tell you that I think you should, and I'm going to show you. We'll talk, in a couple of days or so, but we'll talk, and I want to tell you why, and show you why, and I'm going to show you how starting your content here can have huge significance for you in terms of taking whatever you do here and leveraging it across several other platforms, because the quality here is going to be much higher. So it's going to be much higher. But I'm going to show you how and talk to you and try to convince you. I'm going to try to persuade you, brother, to come on here more, because I think it would be good, and there needs to be more voices like yours where all these people really are. There's a lot of people here. He wanted to ask you something else. He says, he asked me if I could ask you if you would debate Unitarians. Let me see. If you would debate Unitarians with him on his live, is what I think he's saying. Is that right, Anthony? I think he's asking if you would debate with him against Unitarians on his live.
Yeah, I didn't know he was on here. That's why I was surprised he popped in. Yeah, I mean, I obviously have a lot going on, so it wouldn't be like that. That's one of the things. These things are always dangerous. They suck you down a time hole. And, but so, yeah, I could do it sometimes.
Brother Pat?
Well, Anthony, it's my job to ask all the uncomfortable questions. So I hope you don't mind if I ask
Yes, I like tacos.
yet another one.
That's entirely comfortable.
Well, speaking of the first time that we ever had tacos, when I met you, I think the first time we met was at ministry, the tape of that series for on Islam, right? With George Said. I think that's where we first
It's
met.
quite possible. I don't really remember the nature of the event, but I know that, I was down there. I think you were the one that put me up somewhere. Like, I don't know.
Well, right. We don't have to talk about that, but yes.
He
But,
put me up in the ghetto.
my
I'm kidding,
question-
he didn't.
No, I did not. I would never do that. My question has to do with the person that we filmed. I'm just going to name Sam Shamoon. As many know now, he's become an apostate.
Mm-hmm.
What is the relationship when you have a friend who leaves the faith and you're a Christian? How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, the Bible has a example of just such a thing. Judas is the fullest, what do you call this, profile, as it were, of an apostate. So a lot of times people like to try and, they come up with their idea of what's happening in something like this. So you'll have people who say this person was saved and then he was lost. You have other ways that people will talk about this, but the biblical answer is that a person who once professed faith and does not later is not somebody who was saved. They're just exposing that they didn't have genuine faith. But Judas is the fullest example we have of this sort of thing. So think about Judas. When Judas finally betrayed Jesus, Scripture doesn't allow us to think that at this moment, when he outwardly becomes apostate, that at this moment he ceased to be a true born-again believer or something like that. Because what Scripture tells us, well, first of all, just as an aside, it's when you look at Judas, he's never mentioned at any point without you being told that he's the betrayer of Christ. So from the get-go, everybody has these little ways that they're demarcated off from other people because people didn't have last names in those days, right? So you'd have Peter Bar Jonah. He's being called after his father, Peter, son of Jonah. Or you think of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, or sons of thunder. So they have these further qualifiers identifying them to mark them off from other people named James and John. Or they'll be named after the place they're from, Jesus of Nazareth, something like that. Well, Judas is always the one who would betray him, right? That's how Judas is identified. Not a very good thing. So you're already thinking, though, when you first meet with Judas, you're not thinking, this man is, you're already expecting bad here, right? But if you go to John 13, it mentions, this is before Judas betrays Jesus. Hold on, I'm pulling it up here on my computer. Let's see, hold on. You're all very gracious, waiting on me. Okay. Actually, I'm sorry. I meant John 12.
Did I bring it up for you?
No, I got it. So, I mean, you could, but so what happens in this context is Mary took a pound of costly perfume and anointed Jesus' feet with it, and then Judas objects. and it says, Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray him. So notice already it talks about Judas before the Last Supper and all that. This is something that's in his heart to do. The disciples, the other disciples, don't know this. To all outward appearances, Judas is just like them. He believes in Jesus and plans to follow him to the bitter end. Well, if you go back even further in John, all the way back to John 6, back to Jesus' church shrinkage seminar, right? Remember what Jesus said to the 12? He says, "Did I not choose you, the 12, meaning to be my disciples, and yet one of you is a devil." He doesn't say one of you will be a devil. He says one of you is. So Judas is presented from beginning to end, not as a Christian, though to all outward appearances, that's what others would have thought of him. That's why the disciples don't know at the Last Supper. They're thinking, who's he talking about? Who's going to betray Jesus? Peter wants John to ask Jesus because he's so close to him. And, but the point is they don't have any clue. So Judas is the perfect example of apostasy and what that means. It's not somebody who had a genuine faith, later not having faith. It's somebody who didn't have a genuine faith, later being exposed. And that's what 1 John tells us when it says, they went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us, but their going out from us shows that they were not of us, right? So that's kind of like Paul in Romans 7, right? I, but not I, all that kind of stuff. Well, remind me your question again, Pat. I think I'm answering it.
Well, how do you deal when
one thing
with somebody
go ahead.
who is a brother and you preach the gospel shoulder to shoulder? They were a friend and they apostatized.
Yeah. So, first of all, I'd never work with the guy, obviously, because this person still is, this is his bread and butter kind of stuff. So he's still trying to do what he can to, get money from it and that kind of stuff. You'd never see me associate with him at all in that way. Obviously, we're not going to enjoy fellowship with each other, but at the same time, I do have a sense of loyalty to people, and so that makes it difficult because I think of if you think of let's say you have a child and your child does something terrible, I wouldn't expect somebody else to think anything but, bad thoughts, wanting him to be punished for it and so forth. But as my son's father, I would want every good for him, right? I would recognize that he deserves whatever punishment comes with it, but I'm still his dad. So it's kind of analogous to that for me. It's like I was a friend of this person's. They've committed apostasy. So on the one hand, we've got nothing in common as far as that goes. On the other hand, I still want good for that person in a sense. It's kind of a hard position to be in, right? So there's a bit of a tension there. Happily, I don't live around this person, so it's not like I've got to see him all the time. But I will say that Paul's very clear that, when it comes to the people of this world, we don't just turn away from them. But when it comes to people who were brothers or profess to be brothers, they turn away from the faith. Those people were not to have anything to do with,
Nothing to do with them.
Yeah. So, but that doesn't mean I sit over here having bad thoughts. I hope, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about people who profess the faith, it being impossible to renew them to repentance. I think the author is talking about, as far as our efforts go, there's not anything we can do. But that doesn't mean the Lord can't grant genuine conversion. So, I don't know. That's just me. I'm holding out hope that, the Lord could, he's obviously not obligated to, and it's always up to him. But I can hope that he repents and believes in Jesus unto salvation, right? For real. But I don't know. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Anybody else have any questions for Brother Anthony while he's here, while we got him abusing? Let me ask you a question, Anthony. I've got a question for you because I was thinking about this today. and since you're like on, this is your area, a lot of these debates and things like this. Now, you have, I want to try to frame this right. So you have Christian groups who, debaters and evangelists and things like this that will go and they will have a specialty, basically, of people that they're trying to appeal to, like Muslims, let's say, for instance, or the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. To me, and I've been trying to wrestle with this. How do you deal with Judaism? And I'm asking you that because, especially since your wife is Jewish, and your father-in-law or your in-laws, and here's the interesting thing, and I want to frame this for you, because when you say the term Jew, for example, you could be talking about an Israelite in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. You could be talking about a national Israeli today. You could be talking about a religious Jew, and then all these other in between. But there's only one descriptive given to all those different categories of folks. So when you want to address them in terms of the evangelistic side of it, in other words, dealing with the religious Jew, first of all, are there ministries that you know of that do that specifically? And if they do, how do they avoid all of the pitfalls that are being out there about being called anti-Semitic and these kinds of things, when you're dealing with just the religious aspect of it, as you would any other religion? And much the same way they will have problems with Christianity, for example. So how do you frame that type of a ministry? And how would you go after it?
Yeah, so there are groups that do that. One is called One for Israel. And there is a particular guy with that ministry that I really appreciate, whose name is Seth Postel. He's written a number of books. One is called Reading Moses, Seeing Jesus. Another one is Adam is Israel. He's just done a lot of really, really phenomenal work, and it's typically stuff that is of relevance to Christian witness to Jews.
Right.
It's dealing with scripture as pointing to Jesus. Right. Everything he's written is, in one way or another, I think, if I'm not missing anything, basically dealing with that sort of thing. And of course, any group that's focusing on Jewish people is profoundly aware of the history of anti-Semitism and how that comes into play for a lot of Jewish people. All they think of when they think of Christianity is persecution of Jews. And part of addressing that would involve, number one, distinguishing between certain things and Christianity. So, the attempt to just lump Hitler in as a representative, Hitler wasn't a Christian.
Right.
He did use Christianity to some extent because it was a means of tricking, or, in other words, you're not going to, it's sort of like any politician today. If they want to get the Christian vote, they've got to give some indication that they're Christian or something. Right. And they're usually going to have to play both sides. They're going to, even liberals will do this. Right. And they're going to have to try and find a way to say it in a way that gets the Christian votes, but doesn't lose these other people either. Right. Well, Hitler was using some of that, but he's very clear in his writings that he's basically a pagan. He wishes that the German people would return to the old paganism because he thought that it created a more manly man. And all this other stuff. But for Jewish people, he just is at the face of Christianity. And so they think of Christianity as just that religion that persecuted them. Now, there is truth to the fact that the Catholic Church, which is, I would say that the Reformation comes out of the Protestant Reformation comes out of the Western Church. So at a certain point, that history is our history too, right? When the Reformers came, they weren't making a new church. They're saying there are corruptions and errors and so forth that need to be addressed. And when the Roman Catholic magisterium officially anathematized their efforts and basically said, you're damned, at that point, we would say Rome ceased to be proclaiming the true gospel. And she was, basically cutting herself off from those who were believing the gospel and following Jesus. But anyways, that history is our history. And unfortunately, there's some ugly spots in it. And, we just have to make it clear, people can represent others badly, and it doesn't prove that those others are to be blamed, right? If I mentioned before, I hate to keep using my son, my poor son, but I've said if my son went off and did something terrible, I'd still be his father. Well, at the same time, there are children that go off and do something other than what their parents really, oftentimes, they're reflecting what they learned at home, but there are cases of children who didn't learn some of what they did at home. It isn't a product of that. They just got twisted somewhere and they've done terrible things. It doesn't prove that the parents taught that, right? Well, obviously Jesus and the apostles didn't teach these things. And so if you see people later in history engaging in anti-Semitism and persecution, they're not at that point doing what Jesus taught. They're not living up to Christianity. Now, other religions, it's the opposite, actually. If you see somebody doing good in some of these other religions, some other religions, they are actually acting contrary. They're not being good members of that religion, because that religion, in many cases, does justify doing evil deeds. And I would say no religion outside of Christianity has a true foundation for morality, but they do at least try to teach it, right? Many of them. Anyways, so it involves a lot of explaining that this isn't what Jesus taught. Now, a lot of Jewish people are surprised to find out that Jesus was Jewish. They think Jesus was a Catholic or something. It sounds strange to us, but that's how they think of it. They think that, Jesus is like this Gentile. I've heard Jews say, oh, he's the Gentile God or something like that. Yeah. All this weird stuff. And, you tell them that Jesus was a Middle Eastern man from the first century and, lived in Israel and was a rabbi or something like that. And they're like, what? They think that's crazy. But I'll tell you one thing. This isn't exactly what you asked, but it's something that I do a lot. And I know people say this now, but I fell into this from my own experience long before I heard anybody else doing this. I used to get in all these back and forth discussions with my father-in-law, who's an agnostic, but still thinks he's a Jew because, right, the whole ethnicity thing and all that. My wife is no longer Jewish in his eyes because she became a Christian, but he's still Jewish, even though he's an agnostic and doesn't think God exists. Well, we would talk and we would have big arguments about the truth of Jesus and all that. And one day he came over for dinner and I said, Dave, I don't want to argue today. I said, I'd kind of like to just have a good meal. I was just setting him up. I didn't mind arguing. I like arguing, but I was just setting him up, to do what I wanted him to do. I said, here's what I'd like to do. I said, I'd like to just read you something and get your honest thoughts about this. I might make one little comment, but other than that, I don't intend to push back or anything. I just want to eat or whatever. And, we talk about other stuff. And he says, okay. He goes, what do you want to read? And I said, well, let me read it to you. So I read to him from Isaiah 53. Mm-hmm. Now, if people aren't familiar off the top of their head what that is, that's a text in the Old Testament written 700 years before Jesus by Isaiah the prophet, which describes what's going on there almost with, it gives us an insight into what was happening on the cross that goes beyond much of what you see even in the New Testament.
Right.
And same thing would be true of Psalm 22. You get a more vivid description of what was happening to Jesus on the cross in Psalm 22, written 1,000 years before Jesus, than you do from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
True.
Right? Well, so I read to him Isaiah 53, but I didn't tell him what I was reading.
Mhm.
I read it to him and I said, "What do you think about that?" And he said, "Oh," he goes, "Well, you know what I think." I said, "What do you mean I know what you think? I'm asking for a reason." He says, "I don't believe that." I go, "What do you mean you don't believe that?" He says, he goes, "We don't believe that." He goes, "Jews." He says, "Jews don't believe that." And I said, "Well, we all know you're not the best Jew." I said, "So I don't know how that helps, but what does it have to do about being a Jew that says you don't believe this?"
Right.
And I said, what do you not believe?" And he says, "That, what you just read." And I said, "What? Yeah, but what did I just read to you? What's that about? What is it that you don't believe?" I wanted him to commit. And he says, "All that stuff about Jesus." And I said, "Oh, Jesus." I said, "So you think I'm reading something to you about Jesus?" And he says, "Well, yeah." He goes, "It's obvious, right? He's talking about Jesus' crucifixion." And I said, "Oh, it's obvious. It's about Jesus." And he goes, "You think I'm..."
Uh-oh. Oh no. Can anybody else hear him, or is it just me?
Come back, Anthony.
No, he paused.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
frozen.
They'll
good
get it
part.
fixed.
That was weird.
He's frozen.
Oh, there he
he
goes.
is.
There you go.
Good thing I'm on my phone. Yeah,
Going
my
again.
power went out. Yeah. So then I told him, I said, "Dave," I said, "I just read to you from the prophet Isaiah, found in the Old Testament." And his jaw just dropped. And I said, "Okay, let's eat." And so I've learned some tactics over the years. That's one of my favorites. But you've got to, if they already know where you're quoting from, what they're going to do, they're going to act like it doesn't say what you say. Right. So it has to be that they don't know where you're reading from in order for that sort of thing to work. Otherwise, they're just going to be like, "Oh, it's not talking about Jesus. It's,
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Brother Pat, go ahead.
Well, I've got to continue to make things as hard as possible on you, Anthony. I want to ask you a question about the doctrines of grace, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, if you don't mind. Someone might say to you, these doctrines are divisive, and this is a minority position in today's society. Why cause so much trouble? Wouldn't you rather have unity? Why is this so important? What would you say to that?
well, in principle, I've already addressed that from what I was saying about John 6. What you expressed is the underlying way of thinking behind the church growth type stuff, or what they call seeker sensitive. I don't know if people use these terms today. These are all stuff that I would hear a lot in the past. The mindset's still with us, I'm sure of that. But the idea is that we're trying to make Christianity appealing to people. And that means if you think about a business that's trying to get people in, what are they doing? They're changing things according to what they think are people's likes and dislikes in order to get them in. Well, we don't have the luxury of doing that when it comes to Christianity. People can't just come to God any way they please. They've got to come his way. That was the whole point of this temple or tabernacle system, where God is saying, this is the way to approach me. When Nadab and Abihu tried to approach God in a different way, sounded like a good idea, right? Leviticus 10, if people don't know the account, go read it. They brought unauthorized fire into God's presence. It sounded like, hey, this is a cool idea to worship God. A little smoke and mirrors and stuff. Or no, I don't know if they had mirrors, but no, they brought unauthorized fire, and it says fire shot out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. So God tells us how we approach him. In fact, he's the seeker. So if we're going to be seeker sensitive, we need to be sensitive to what he wants, right? He says that he's the one that came to seek and save that which is lost. John 4, Jesus said, God is seeking those, right, who will worship him in spirit and in truth. So God is the great seeker. He's the one that we should be trying to please. We don't make up. I've heard people say, think about this. I mean, if we're going to change this, why not change other things? I've heard people say, Unitarians, for example,